Episode number 200. Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Jo Isenstadt, IBCLC, which stands for International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. I help moms with breastfeeding. If you would like to find out more about myself, the services that I provide, and how you can work with me, all you need to do is go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz for more information. I love taking little breaks just like the next person. For this Labor Day weekend 2017, I am actually enjoying a bit of downtime with my family. The temperatures continued to be in the triple digits here in Phoenix, Arizona, so most of the activities will be indoors, catching up on some Netflix shows, going to the movies, and if I'm outside at all, you will probably find me in the pool. I like to go back into the archives from time to time and bring you another popular show with one of Phoenix, Arizona's beloved midwives, Joanna Wilder. You will learn that she has roots firmly planted in Arizona, where she began her nursing career before becoming a midwife. She serves families in the Phoenix area and is also heavily involved with moms offering education with programs she has developed. Please enjoy today's show.
I thought that I knew so much by then because I was in a position of helping other women with breastfeeding. And yet, every baby, I found that there were just these walls that I would run up against where I felt like I knew nothing. And each baby had a different style of breastfeeding. So, all the things I thought, this is how it is. Then I had to relearn new things. My third child only would nurse on one side. And if you disturbed her, then we had to, it did not work.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
I have lots of friends who are midwives all over the United States. And here in Arizona where I live, we have many wonderful midwives. I can't believe it's taken me this long to have a midwife on the show. I also can't believe it's my good fortune to have one of the nicest, smartest, and most humble midwives that I have come to know be my guest today. You will learn that she is not only a midwife who says that she supports breastfeeding, but just listen to her story and you will see that she talks the talk and walks the walk. There were a few things in this interview that she shared that I never ever would have guessed about her, and I honestly was quite surprised about what she revealed and her candor in doing so. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show with one of Arizona's most loved midwives. Joanna Wilder, RN, BSN, LM, and CPM, is a mom, midwife, and a mentor. She has children by birth and by fostering and adoption. Joanna has been practicing good birth for 25 years. As a nurse, Joanna started out at an inner-city Phoenix hospital in 1990. 3 years gave her a good foundation in labor and delivery, nurse and postpartum in Phoenix. Next, she helped create Bethany Birth Center. For 14 years, she had the privilege to work as a nurse in the birth center, led a unique childbirth education program, and served as a community liaison orienting women to birth choices in Arizona. This birth center closed in 2007. In November 2006, she began to work towards her licensure as a midwife. In May 2010, Joanna was licensed as a midwife in Arizona and completed her national certification, or CPM, in April of 2011. Joanna has been involved in grassroots community development in inner-city Phoenix for 25 years. She works with the Teen Mom program in the neighborhood and also with the breastfeeding grant program bringing support to Hispanic moms. She is passionate about helping women learn to trust their bodies. One of her passions, birthed from her own story, is walking with women as they heal from childhood sexual abuse. Joanna believes that the birth space is holy ground. Breastfeeding creates a powerful space for attachment and bonding to occur, and for mothers to reclaim their bodies and their stories. I would very much love to welcome Joanna Wilder to the All About Breastfeeding show. Nice to have you here, Joanna.
Thank you.
All right, so I would love for you to share with us a little bit about the family that you grew up in, what it was like as a little girl and growing up.
So I think there's the childhood that you live in the moment, and then you get to revisit it all of your life. So my childhood in the years I was growing up was an environment where our lives were very public and we had to be very perfect. And I know that influenced some of the choices that I made in my early adulthood, especially as I entered motherhood.
And when you say public, what do you mean?
We were in positions of influence, and so the things that we did were seen by lots of people with lots of opinions given. So,
Okay. All right. So when you were a kid, you were younger, are there things that you thought that you would be doing with your life when you were younger? And can you tell me how that compares to what you're currently doing?
well, curiously, for Halloween when I was 4 years old, I dressed up as a nurse. So
Ah,
it's kind of ironic considering that now I am one. And I also noticed that I always thought during my high school years and college years that I would be working in an international context. Even though we're here in Phoenix, actually, we have always worked in environments and neighborhoods that are very multicultural
so you grew up in Phoenix.
from the time I was 9. So that's about as native as you get.
Pretty much here in Phoenix. I've learned that as a New Yorker.
Yep.
At what point did you realize that you would like to become a midwife?
I really wasn't sure about that because I loved what I did as a nurse. But at that point, that was the only birth center that we had in Phoenix. And I was really not wanting to go back into a hospital environment. So I very nearly decided to go into pediatrics, which was my second love. But in a process of discernment, began to realize that there were gifts and instincts I had honed over these almost 20 years at that point that really were valuable and that were part of what I offer to the world.
That was also interesting for me to learn because when I moved here, the Bethany Birth Center was in full swing, and I had no idea that you were a part of the beginnings of it.
Yes.
And I know that I personally was very sad because it was the only one at the time. I was very sad in '07 when it closed.
That was a loss to the community, but it's curious that out of that now have come nearly a half dozen birth centers in Phoenix. So,
I know that's amazing. That goes along with sometimes when I think when one door closes, another opens, because at the time I was personally devastated and I thought, there's only one, and I had no idea what it took to open a birth center, but I knew it must have been a lot of work and very difficulty. And I thought, are we ever going to get one back? And now we have quite a few, so it's wonderful to see.
the irony is that there was a time that I was invited to a home birth when I was a brand new nurse. And not only did I decline, but I did not decline politely. And it told the family that I would not be involved with their birth because I considered their choice to be dangerous and irresponsible. So you can imagine the humor that I do home birth now.
Well, not only that you must think about that time, but it certainly must help you understand and empathize with other people who may have that opinion, right?
Of course, because the choices of where you birth are very personal, and the experiences that a person has had in seeing birth and all of the time around it really influences those opinions, which often are strong opinions.
Well, I know that you are a gift to so many local parents, so I'm glad that there was a shift in your thinking.
Thanks, Lori.
I would love to take a minute and just I always like to bring it down just a few notches when we start talking about some of your own personal experiences. So, Are you willing to just close your eyes and do a little bit of deep breathing with me?
Sure.
Okay. So we're going to close our eyes and take a nice deep breath into the nose. And slowly, as you let the air out, just let the muscles in your face, your forehead, your cheeks, your jaw, your tongue just loosen up. And take another deep in breath. And it's always nice to just relax our shoulders, our arms, uncross your feet. And take a nice deep breath, one more in, and slowly let the air out. Have you ever had the conversation with your mom if you were breastfed?
I was always told that I was breastfed, and when I began to struggle with my own early breastfeeding issues with my eldest, I started to ask her more questions and discovered that, like most moms of the 60s, I was breastfed for 2 days. And then her pediatrician told her that the baby was not getting enough milk, and I was switched to a formula and then had a series of formulas and a series of foods because everything was allergenic for me at that point. I'm so curious what would have happened had I kept breastfeeding.
Yes, and there's a couple of generations that we just won't know those answers to. But it's interesting as I've been asking this question, the myriad of answers. But one of the common ones when moms who were babies in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s were told by their mothers that they were breastfed, frequently they find out a little later that yes, they were, but it was for 2 days, 2 weeks, 1 month, 6 weeks, maybe.
And all of
And
that matters. So I'm glad that I had those first couple days, but it's curious that was how it was framed.
well, and what my mother has told me and her peers have told me, for the most part, it was frowned upon for a lot of women. And then for other women who lived in an environment that it was not frowned upon, it was then thought to be a very, very excellent thing to do, but just to get the quote unquote good stuff in the first couple of days or couple of weeks. And that's all they thought that it was good for. So they stopped because that's just what they thought.
It's so interesting.
I know. I'd love for you to share a little bit about your breastfeeding experience. And I know that you have several children. So if you could pick just one baby, and usually when moms have several, it's their first. So you choose. And I'd love for you to talk about what your very early days of breastfeeding your baby was like.
Well, fortunately, I was in a place where I had breastfeeding support because I was working at a hospital with nurses and midwives who were passionate about breastfeeding. I really don't know if I would have continued if that had not been the case. I breastfed as a purely philosophical decision. I didn't expect to enjoy it. I just decided it was the right thing to do. And I resonated, Lori, with your phrase that you used in your first podcast that in some ways my stubbornness served me because that stubbornness kept me going. And I had to ask a lot of questions. What was surprising to me as things unfolded was how much I enjoyed it. And I look back now when I was doing attachment work with my boys who were being fostered at the time, who are now my sons. I was so shocked to realize how difficult it was to hold eye contact in a cradling position as we were practicing those skills together. And I was struck again by what a protection it was for my children that I breastfed because it made me do what was probably very uncomfortable for me at the time, which was to cradle them, to gaze in their eyes, and to do that for hours every day.
Which is something that we know that by and large comes naturally when you're breastfeeding your baby.
It does. And so I began to learn those skills because of the breastfeeding.
That's really interesting. Your experience with breastfeeding your first, when you say that you might not have continued if you were not around other people who felt breastfeeding was important and who were able to support you, and you were doing it for pretty much philosophical reasons, When you say you might not have continued, is that just because it was hard work, it took a lot of time, and or was it because you had any kind of problems or pain?
I think because breastfeeding had skipped a generation in my family on both sides, the feedback that I was getting from my mom and my mom-in-law was full of lots of questions and fears of whether the baby was getting enough. And so I needed to have a circle of women around me giving me support and good information because it wasn't something I could get from my mom or my mom-in-law. It had skipped that generation in our country.
Which is, I know that's what happened for many of us. So even if our mothers and mother in laws are supportive verbally and are trying to do whatever they can to help us in the household, when we are having issues or we do question, or I think the biggest thing is when our breastfed babies cry
Yes.
and our mothers have no experience breastfeeding. Understandably, one of the first things they want to do is say, well, maybe you should just give the baby some formula because maybe your baby isn't getting enough. So there's such a lack of trust in the whole process and in the milk making department, right?
Sure. And that would certainly be understandable.
Right. Do you remember at what point it changed from something that you were just planning on doing with something that you not only enjoyed, but you thought about with my next baby, this is just what I'm going to be doing?
Probably that was lost in the fog of postpartum.
So at some point it shifted, and hindsight, I mean, you know that it happened.
Yes.
So when you were pregnant with your second baby, was it do you remember, was the early days easier? Did you feel like, I mean, I know at that point you were surrounded by wonderful people, but do you feel at that point if you didn't have that support, it would have been fine for you?
I thought that I knew so much by then because I was in a position of helping other women with breastfeeding. And yet, every baby, I found that there were just these walls that I would run up against where I felt like I knew nothing. And each baby had a different style of breastfeeding. So, all the things I thought, this is how it is. Then I had to relearn new things. My third child only would nurse on one side. And if you disturbed her, then we had to, it did not work. And so I had to learn that it is possible to nurse a baby just on one side per feeding. And she taught me to be humble about the things that I thought I knew.
Yeah, that's so interesting. What I often tell moms is because sometimes they'll call me and they'll be even more frustrated than the first time mom. Their entry to the phone call is, this is my fourth baby, and I nursed the other three, and everything was just fine. And I'm so incredibly frustrated. I'm humbled now because I understand what other moms were talking about, but I'm so frustrated. I have no idea what's going on, and I have no idea why and what's the problem.
Hmm.
So, of course, I tell them that I really need to see them to figure it out. But by and large, what I really want them to know at the time of the phone call is that they may be the same mother if they haven't done any kind of surgery or had any other issues with their breast tissue. They're the same mother, but what's different in the equation is their baby.
Absolutely. And I know that one of the things that was unique to my journey was I was also living life with an autoimmune disease. And so when my rheumatoid flared postpartum with each of the two girls, I had to fight to continue to breastfeed. So by that point, I know that that shift had occurred inside of me to where I would be willing to fight and to take some risks to choose to continue to breastfeed. And so I really prized that option by that point.
Yeah, that sure is a learning experience too. Did you realize at the time that your rheumatoid affected the breastfeeding?
I think I didn't understand so much of that and probably didn't give grace to myself. I just tried so hard to do it with a fierce stubbornness, really.
Love the stubbornness. It gets us through a lot of things in life,
Yes,
right?
wisdom comes later, but
Yes. I would like to know. a little bit about your further educating yourself with regards to breastfeeding because I know a lot of nurses and midwives, they do get training, some training in breastfeeding during the course of your midwifery training. And there are some midwives that I know that have taken further education for the breastfeeding because they realize that they want to know more and they need to know more. So, at what point did you realize that you wanted to take further education and why was that?
Well, it was actually when I was a nurse and coordinating our childbirth classes at the birth center, and we would have big discussions about whether we needed to have breastfeeding classes because the moms were asking for it, and yet we had a philosophical basis where we believed that breastfeeding was instinctive and natural. And yet at the same time, it's a learned thing. And so we began to know that we needed to offer some support to the moms. And I did a study at that point where we called all of our moms at 2 days and 2 weeks and found that almost all of them were nursing at 2 weeks. I'm sorry, at 2 days. And at 2 weeks, we found that about half of them had stopped. And so we began to look at those questions. So at that point, I actually came, you may not remember this, and shadowed with you and with another Lori and began to learn from the lactation consultants who were active in the hospitals that we would transfer to. And so I began to learn by mentoring some of those skills. Then as a midwife, I went and did a course through our breastfeeding grant program at Neighborhood and went to ASU along with 13 of our community leaders and did a lactation counselor program. So I have a long ways to go, but I feel like I'm beginning to get the tools I need to help moms with the basic kinds of questions that come up.
Yeah, I do remember that because we were in this the childbirth education at Phoenix Baptist Hospital, and sometimes because we all work different schedules, I may have met you once or twice, perhaps, but didn't really get to spend any time with you until you shadowed me, and it was really nice meeting you. I would like to hear a little bit about the program, the grant that you have for helping moms breastfeeding in the neighborhood. Can you talk about that?
Sure. It's actually a grant that came to Neighborhood Ministries, which is a community development venture right by the Capitol. We began to notice that our moms, both in our community and specifically our teen moms, would think that they would breastfeed, and particularly in the Hispanic community, had a very high rate of beginning to breastfeed, and yet the rate of continuing to breastfeed was really low. And so we spent about 6 months just out walking, talking to people, and listening to their stories and trying to begin to hear themes in why that was occurring. So we actually applied for a breastfeeding grant, and Neighborhood Ministries and Creciendo Unidos each were given a $30,000 breastfeeding grant from the Kellogg cereal people to develop a 40-week curriculum which supports moms during their pregnancy and during the first year and helps them to understand more about the breastfeeding process, and then comes alongside after they've had their baby, pairing them with a mentor who has been trained as a lactation counselor so that if it's something that they want to do, they have the support to continue.
What is it that you've noticed that has happened as a result of this grant that surprised you?
One of the surprising things is that people are talking about it. 10 years ago, because I've been with this community for 25 years, it was really uncommon to see someone breastfeeding or to hear people talking about it. And now it's really common to see moms wearing their babies, to see someone breastfeeding during an event or even during church or something of that nature. I see the preschool moms talking to each other. So it's just becoming more common, and I think there's a shift. One of the things that we really talked about and wrestled with, though, is that we didn't want to create a shame message so that if a person chose not to breastfeed or maybe it didn't go the way that they thought it would go, we didn't want to communicate then that they were making a choice that was less than.
And I know that sometimes women do get that message, whether it's an internal message or worse yet, that someone verbalized that to them. So I'm very excited to hear that you're paying it very close attention to that as possibly being an issue because not only for the baby that they have now, but it may affect any future babies or how they approach other women about breastfeeding, basically how they were treated.
One of the things that's very difficult that's not within my control is that I believe that birth experiences have a great deal to do with how breastfeeding unfolds, especially in the early days. And so many of our moms have very violating birth experiences, and then it's such a setup to also struggle with breastfeeding.
Right, and I speak to so many mothers who they feel particularly so if they had a difficult pregnancy and or more so sometimes a difficult birth, then the breastfeeding is something that they had expected to happen rather easily. And if it's not, they're just in a much worse off emotional place because this is now the last part of the whole experience that they expected to go easy. And if it's not, then they're really in a bad way emotionally. And I know that you've worked with moms like this. So can you tell me a little bit about any mom that you've worked with that has that had that experience and some of the things that you did to help her turn it around?
Well, one of the things that I decided as I started my own practice as a midwife is that something was so important between that 2 days and 2 weeks. That's a very vulnerable time. And so I designed my postpartum care to reflect where I feel like some of the vulnerable points come in breastfeeding. So we do a 2 hour home visit at 1 day and 3 days, and often 7 days at home as well. And then we do an optional 2 week visit for an hour and a 3 week, and then a 5 to 6. One of the things I notice is there's a lot of support that's needed, particularly between 3 and 7 days. And so we take whatever time is needed to come alongside to pull in lactation consultants. As you know, I always call you. We take a lot of time to give that support at the key junctures, because when a mom can receive the nurturing and the support and the knowledge that she needs when it's needed, then almost always, not every time, but almost always, she's able to make it through and come out more confident and more empowered and more knowledgeable and more able to trust her instincts as a mother, not just for breastfeeding, but as she's going forward and moving into these new roles that are so important.
Yes, and I'm so thrilled that you get that and that you get it, you've noticed it, and you've set a plan of action into your postpartum care plan for moms to really address that because you can also talk about this in your experience, but I also know that I think you said before between 2 weeks and 2 months that the huge drop off. And I have certainly noticed that there's probably about an 85% breastfeeding initiation rate. And by the 2 week mark, at least half of those moms are, they're either not breastfeeding at all or they're pumping and bottle feeding and or they're supplementing, which is far different than what the intention was, which was exclusive breastfeeding in the early days.
Right. I know that
So,
when I went back to work, that was a really vulnerable transition for me. And at that point in my life, I was still the main breadwinner in our home and working as a nurse while my husband did grad school. So I went back, and within 2 days, I had a breast infection. And that was a low point. And then I began to realize no matter how many babies are being born and how crazy it is in labor and delivery, the women who were smokers always took their smoke breaks. And I needed to be a little less shy about saying that I needed to go take a pump break. I could pump in 10 minutes, and I didn't need to wait until, it was soaking through, or I was so engorged. And so I had to become a little bit more vocal and a little bit less shy about saying what I needed in the work environment. But that was sure a time where I needed support.
Yes, and you know what? You brought up something very interesting because I used to be able to say that years ago. I used to be able to pull what I call the smoking card and say, because especially nurses, and even when I worked at Baptist Hospital, they would say, I just can't do it. I'm the only person here in the nursery, or there are two of us and we're very busy and there's nobody to take our place. And I would talk about, look at all the other nurses on the floor. They're all taking their smoke breaks, and you need to figure out how to take your quote unquote pump break
Well,
and be
gratefully,
very
it's not
vocal
as
about it.
common. It's not as common now as it was then. But nurses at that point, a lot of nurses were smoking.
Right. That's what I said. I used to be able to pull the go out for a smoke card, and now they're not smoking as much, thankfully. But I still talk about that. They need to, this is the beginning of advocating for not only your baby, your breasts. It's just the beginning, and you need to. There's a certain shift that needs to happen. That mama bear needs to come out, and we need to teach others, especially in the workplace, in this particular conversation, on how to treat us and what breastfeeding moms and breast pumping moms need to do. We need to teach them. And so you got to take those breaks. Taking a little break today to let you know that you can join our Facebook group where moms who listen to this podcast can chat with each other, help and support one another in their breastfeeding journey. I like for this to be a place where you can join in and offer help and suggestions to moms who have questions. I usually check in every day to ensure that the group runs smoothly, it continues to be a safe place to share your thoughts and feelings, and that any advice giving is accurate. And I also post some interesting news pieces about breastfeeding in the news and some science info and some jokes and some humor. For right now, let's get back to the show. I'd like to know, with the changes that you've made in your practice or how you've built it into your practice, what do you see different in the moms that you're working with compared to other practices that you've observed? It certainly sounds like you've made a huge difference in the breastfeeding rates with regards to not just initiation, but in the long term. And how does this compare to other practices that you observe?
I'm a solo practice, so I'm not out in other practices. But the thing that's been so surprising to me compared to my experience before becoming a midwife is almost all the moms are nursing unless there's a medical reason that they can't, which is rare, like a medication. But almost all the moms are nursing. And the thing that surprised me is how few are experiencing postpartum depression. And I think that somewhere along the way, I picked up the idea that breastfeeding difficulties were normal and that postpartum depression was normal. And so it's been so curious to me about how much different it is for a woman to hit those challenges, which are really intense, and yet be able to have some protection during those days and weeks that are so vulnerable. And the side benefit, I think, is that at the same time, when a woman's spirit is so permeable, and that's designed to be the case so that they can bond with the baby and take in all of the oxytocin that's flowing. But during that time when her body and spirit are so vulnerable, if she's able to receive protection and nurture, it seems like there's much less of a setup for postpartum depression.
Absolutely, which is why I love talking to you about this. And I really want to accentuate the positive changes that are made from midwives taking really care of this period and this very important postpartum period in a mom's life. So I would like for you to talk a little bit about breastfeeding with relationship to moms who have had a previous childhood verbal, physical, or sexual abuse. And if you can pull out a story of an anonymous mom, but one that I think that my listeners could relate to with regards to how breastfeeding really helped them to attach and to bond with their baby in a way that might not have otherwise happened. And particularly if you've ever met a mom who was just not on board with breastfeeding and you realize that it came from a previous childhood abuse.
Mm-hmm. I had the opportunity when I was a student to participate in a Midwifery Today conference entitled Hope and Healing, which was focused specifically on counselors and midwives who were working with women and understanding that probably at least 1 in 3 of us have experienced sexual abuse as a child, and that's not even talking about emotional or physical or spiritual abuse. So we began to have conversations, just as Penny Simkin's book, When Survivors Give Birth, and Julia Singh and Mickey Spurlick's book, Survivors' Moms, came out. And so as we're listening to these stories, I began to realize that when I'm in a birth space, I'm on holy ground. And in that space, I have opportunity to bear witness both to this birth and to this time in a mom's life. But I also often have very unique glimpses of the rest of her story, whether that story is known or that story is unknown. Oftentimes it's clear. And so, in that place, then, as I come alongside in breastfeeding, I bring that knowledge with me, understanding that she may well be experiencing some PTSD or post traumatic stress. Things may have awakened within her. We say that memory lives in the cells, not just in your brain. And so there may be memories that have woken up because of the physiologic triggers. So she may be experiencing lots of things. And so then as we come into breastfeeding, sometimes a mom will put the baby to breast and then feel just a very strong sense of revulsion or contradictory feelings that she doesn't expect and feels surprised by or maybe ashamed of. There's just things that she might be experiencing because of other experiences she's had in her life where her breasts have been sexual objects or she has been touched without permission. And so it's such a powerful time to begin to stand alongside and gently reframe that so that if she wants to, she can find out that it's okay to choose to offer her breasts as a way to nourish her baby, that it's not just a sexual object, that it's her choice to give or not to give, to say yes or to say no. Those are powerful shifts in the process that have impact not only on breastfeeding and on the baby today, but on her healing process probably for many years to come.
As a society, we're doing better, I think, at women talking about their any kind of abuse that they suffered as a young person, and more are getting help from it. However, I don't think it's being hugely translated to the pregnancy,
Yes.
birth, and breastfeeding experience. And I just love that you're really well knowledgeable about it. You're paying very close attention to it. You're looking for the signs. And if it's something that you see, even just the knowledge that you have that when a woman puts her baby to the breast, that she is revulsed by it. I love that you use that word because it's something that I have seen before and it's very frightening. And there are enough people who don't really recognize where it's probably stemming from.
Mm-hmm. And I
And
know that so often that may not be something that's known or connected in that moment. For myself, birth was the door into my story. I didn't know my own story of abuse before I birthed. So I didn't know during my breastfeeding experiences the first 2 times any of that. And yet I felt a whole range of emotions in my body. And there's shame that comes up because the message that is unspoken is that you're supposed to love this and it's supposed to be wonderful. And if it's not, people don't talk about that. And so there's very little permission to say that you're experiencing a range of emotions or that you're experiencing things that feel scary or not understood.
yes, and it's the you brought out a lot of things, but one of them really is the not understood, which I think is what's so frightening to women. The whole powerful experience and change of life event of giving birth is just amazing to begin with, and for some women, traumatic, just the process of giving birth. And then if it's also bringing up these other emotions, it's all like intertwined, and there's such confusion to women who have not addressed these issues before. And then for their caregivers to not necessarily be able to help them unwind and to bring it out and to help them understand and talk about and separate all the feelings that they're having. And then because we care so much about postpartum women and them not getting anxiety and not getting depressed, that sometimes I think the movement to not talk about these issues is it's kind of swept under the cover because we think we need these postpartum moms to heal.
Mhm.
And I think what's missing is that it does need to be recognized, addressed, talked about, and that is exactly a big part of the healing process, not sweeping it under the covers.
I think that you're bringing up such a good point, and it's not that I need to frame for someone what anything means that I have noticed. That's not my job. But just to begin to say, when you birth, you feel all your ages at the same time. And there may be things that you felt that you don't understand, and there can be space to explore that when you're ready.
You are a gift to the women and families you work with, Joanna. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I would love for you to share just one thing that you've learned as a mother that you would like for other mothers to know.
Well, I wrote an article about giving your child a voice after I had one child. Now, I don't think I would write any articles because probably I know that I don't know more than I know what I know. So I think that the one thing I feel like that I've continued to grow into or grown into, as the case may be, is that sense of trusting my instincts. First of all, recognizing that I have some, and then as I began to really settle into that knowledge, to really trust it. And I would say if there's one thing as a new mom is so hard to do, is to begin to feel and to trust instincts. Midwifery is very focused on walking with a woman and giving those choices back to her. But in general, our system in the United States tends to still be a top down system where um, a person is told this is what you'll do. And so in the pregnancy, they're told what to do. When they go to the pediatrician, they're told what to do. And there's very little opportunity to practice the skills of feeling and noticing and trusting and acting on instincts.
You bring up a very good point, and I would like to know from you if there's anything, one thing in particular that you do with women during their pregnancy to help bring this out in them that they do have instincts. Because when we're pregnant, we're so much looking at our providers. Is this normal? Is this okay? Can I do this? Should I? Could I? And what are some things that you do with a mom to help them begin to trust those instincts?
I had kind of an overdeveloped brain from too much school. And so it has been a gift to me to begin to learn to use multisensory tools to get down below just the thinking part of my brain into more of a primal or instinctual brain. So I often do bring in some of those tools. We might use collage and use something that's a 3D object to collage so that on a cigar box, for instance, the outside could show this is what people see about how I feel about having a baby or becoming a mother. But on the inside of the cigar box, there's words and phrases of what do I really feel. And often the stark difference between what's going on the inside and what's going on the outside is able to be brought out in a pictorial way. Or we'll use fabric or silks or torn cloth to begin to open conversations in those arenas that often don't have words. I think that Pam England's book, Birthing from Within, has some wonderful exercises in that arena for a person who is walking themselves through the process of getting in touch with what's going on that might be helpful to get in touch with instincts.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds crazy good. It's such a creative way rather than, sometimes the intent is to sit someone down in a classroom style and explain it to someone and then expect them to just follow suit. And I just love the creative way that you've come about bringing this out to a mom. It's by teaching is by doing.
It probably comes from doing too many groups, as we've done groups with women who are exploring their stories and who are looking for healing and recovery. We bring so many of those tools into that space so that it can be multisensory and create healing on many levels.
When you say you're a mentor, I know to the young girls in the neighborhood, but also to your midwifery students, apprentices.
Mhm.
Are these things that you're bringing into your practice and teaching?
I hope so. I
Just by
actually hesitated when I said I'm a mentor, and I thought I am at that stage of life.
Yes, you sure are, and you have so much to give, and so much knowledge, life experience, and I know that we're always learning, but my goodness, you bring so much into your practice working with moms, and it's just amazing. And so that's I am sitting here thinking, I hope this is stuff that you're bringing into your mentorship, and it sounds like you are.
Yes.
You maybe even hesitated because it's maybe not something you're sitting down again and saying, this is a class we're doing on
No.
XYZ, but you're just modeling the behavior for them.
At the same time, I feel like such a learner. I feel like midwifery constantly makes me feel like I know nothing, and there's so much to learn from the women and from the babies themselves. And I know, like, in terms of breastfeeding, I call you pretty often because I often feel like there's so much more to learn and to discover, not just about the physiology, but about what it means to really walk with someone.
And I say the same thing about the work that I do. I think if you ever do get to that point where your feeling is becoming second nature, then will come the mom and or the baby who will teach you, nope, there's still a lot more to learn here.
Absolutely.
Tell me, if you could put your arms around your newly postpartum self, what words of wisdom would you whisper in your ear?
I think that what my heart really needed to know, but I didn't know, was that I was safe and that I could be a mom and I
Mm.
could keep my child safe. And those are words born of my own story, but they're messages that I needed to know.
And will resonate with almost all of us, I believe. Because when we become a mother, all of a sudden even if we're smart and intelligent, we may hold a high position in a company, our own business, but then you give birth and you're brought way down to the core. And then we start, some of us, having a lack of confidence in our abilities to mother, nourish, and take care and keep our baby safe because it's also fresh, it's also new to us.
I desperately wanted someone to give me a syllabus and just say, if you do this, this, and this, you'll get an A.
Well, and that's funny. I mean, I definitely felt that way too. And my mother listens to this, so she'll probably laugh again. But a lot of times I say, I don't know, I just wanted to go back to the womb. I wanted to move back to her house, back to my old bedroom, and have her figure out how to help me figure out how to be a mother.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about what you're currently involved in? If there's anything new and exciting, any programs that you're working with?
I'm kind of not too much into programs, but maybe that's my inner rebel. But I do. So
Let's see what other words can I can I put
no,
in there
absolutely.
because
I do have a small practice. I take 1 to 2 women per month who are due, and so I don't advertise. I just that's because I want to be able to enter in a really rich and deep way with the women that I say yes to. And so when they come, I always feel such curiosity about how I will be changed from experiencing this journey with them and what gifts there might be that I have to offer. So it's a really unique way to practice. And then at Neighborhood, I come alongside the Teen Mom program, which is called Mom's Place, and the breastfeeding program, which is called El Mejor Empiezo, and participate in helping to set the choices and goals that we're making for each year. And then I also have opportunity to open my community house called Gracia and have the women come, the young moms and the older moms together, and do field trips there. And in the field trips, we give them opportunity to experience some of the things that they might experience in a prenatal, but with an understanding of what's going on with their body. So we just play. We find where the baby is lying. We draw pictures on their belly. We show them how to tell what position they're in. We show them how to connect with their baby while they're on the inside. We talk about breastfeeding, and we bring babies that are breastfeeding, and we weigh the babies, and we play games. And so it's just a warm, small, interactive place to begin to allow conversation about what's going on inside in the pregnancy with the babies and what they're experiencing with their care. And we're wanting to know that you can trust your body, and your body talks to you, and your body tells the truth. Those messages are really core in what we do. And then I continue to work with journey groups and some small groups through Open Hearts, which allows me to engage with women who are intentionally setting aside time and space to look at their story and what the impact of their story has been, no matter what it contains. All of us have experienced both beauty and pain in our journey.
So you just put a whole lot of stuff right in there. And for anything that you talked about, I keep wanting to say programs, but
it's okay. I'm not going to switch.
With your practice and any of the other work that you're involved in, I'd be happy to take some info after the show. And I have a place on my website that I call show notes that I could put the information in if you wanted anybody else to learn any more about this. I just think, you're truly practicing the art of each one teach one, and you're practicing it by the doing, and you're modeling behavior for other young girls and other midwives. And I'm just so impressed with all the work that you do, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Lori.
All right. Is there anything else that you would have wanted to add that you want people to know? Anything that I haven't asked you?
When my daughter, who is 11, left her school, she was a Waldorf kid, and now she is in a more classical school. They asked her whether there was anything she remembered. What was her very first memory of the school? And she had been there since her sister was bigger. And so she said, I just miss the sweet milk. I used to ride around in the sling, and I used to drink the sweet milk. And she starts launching into talking about breastfeeding. I was so startled. The teacher was startled. I'm sure the children were startled. But it was such a reminder to me that even though most children don't necessarily articulate that even as a little person, less than 2, those memories of being cradled and snuggled and nourished and safe were woven into the very fabric of her being. And that's a powerful foundation to go from.
What a wonderful way to end our interview. That is so sweet. Thank you so much for sharing that, Joanna. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
And that's it for our show today. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I hope you're enjoying the shows. iTunes makes it so easy for you to get all the previous and upcoming shows. Just go to iTunes and search for All About Breastfeeding and subscribe to the show. As promised, I am now offering several ways that we can connect with each other. I talk to mothers all the time after they have given birth. Many have said they would have liked the opportunity to talk with me before their baby was born so they could go over certain things that may have been troubling them about breastfeeding. You have many questions about your own health, medication you're taking, and how it might impact breastfeeding, or perhaps about your breast and nipple anatomy. Perhaps you have fears or anxieties about breastfeeding, and you feel it will be helpful to talk it out before your baby's born. Some mothers just have a bunch of questions that could not be answered in your regular breastfeeding class because of time or privacy. These are just some of the many reasons you will want to have a Skype consult with me. Talking things through can help you clear the way emotionally for an excellent start with breastfeeding. All you need to do is go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/Skype to schedule your online prenatal consult. Next up to talk about, I finally have all the pieces in place and our online breastfeeding mothers group is ready to go. I know how hard it can be in the last trimester, just waiting to give birth, looking forward to holding your baby in your arms for the first time, and the excitement building as you look forward to breastfeeding your baby. How great would it be for you to hang out with other pregnant moms and new mothers? Pregnant moms get to find out what new motherhood is like and what newborn breastfeeding is like from brand new moms. And the brand new moms get to talk about all your breastfeeding stuff and ask all your questions about normal newborn breastfeeding. What I have is a virtual online breastfeeding mothers group where you sign on once a week to meet and chat with other mothers who are going through similar experiences as you are. You become friends and support each other. I will be facilitating the group, so you know there's always an experienced lactation consultant ready to jump in and answer your questions and make sure the information is accurate. If you would like to be part of 10 mothers who will meet once a week virtually for 8 weeks to talk about all about your breastfeeding stuff, just check out allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/support. You will find out more detailed information on the group's start dates and prices and how it all works. I really am excited and I look forward to meeting with you on Google Hangout and getting to know each other.